My name is Evan Jacobs with Autism Behavior Services. As part of our interview series where I speak to people who are making a difference for autism, I spoke with the Honorable Liz Thomson. Liz Thomson is the chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee in the New Mexico Legislature. Let's meet Liz. Can you share with us your journey with autism and why this is important to you?
So I'm a pediatric physical therapist. I'm retired now. So I graduated from college in 1984 and immediately went into that. And of course, I was an advocate for my kids, and then in 1991, my son Eric was born. And after a period of normal development, somewhere around 20 months, he lost all of his language and started screaming. And so we started on our journey of figuring out what was going on. And since I had that background, I I felt like I was in a better place than most. So I convinced myself that he had fluid in his ears because he had stopped talking and started screaming. So we went down that road. Part of me knew that that wasn't all the problem because when his favorite commercial would come on TV or you would open a bag of candy or a bag of chips, he'd come running from the other room. So in my brain, I knew that it wasn't hearing, but in my heart, I wanted it to be hearing because then you could put in tubes or, something. And so we went down that road and we had to sedate him to get a hearing test. And we got that and it was normal. And so we went through a program at the University of New Mexico and got him diagnosed or got an evaluation for him. And he scored with an IQ below 55, and also that his gross and fine motor skills were severely delayed. And as a PT, I knew that that wasn't true. This was a 2-year-old at that time who could catch flies out of the sky, with his fingers. And so that broke our hearts for a while. And we sat down, and my husband and I, and we said, that's not right. And something in the back of my mind said autism. And my education at UNM in the PT program had one paragraph in one book about autism. So I pulled out my textbook and looked at it, and it was pretty much the opposite of what Eric was. I mean, he loved to cuddle, he loved eye contact, but he also didn't really use words. And so it took us probably another year to get a diagnosis of autism. And still, he didn't fit what I thought was the mold of autism. Much have I learned that there's no such thing. So I finally asked the evaluators for a copy of the protocol so that I could see what it was that made Eric have autism. It wasn't lack of eye contact. It wasn't lack of cuddliness. And once I got the protocol and looked at it, it's like, oh, that's what Eric's autism looks like. So that's how our journey began. And like all parents probably, we ran into roadblocks and we ran into therapists I remember the first speech and language pathologist we went to, he all he would do was scream. And so she came out in a mini skirt and high heels and hose and to work with him. And he was a little wild 2-year-old. And I said, she doesn't know what she's doing because you don't work with kids in that kind of attire, particularly kids on the spectrum. And so after she did her hour with him, we met my husband and I met with her, and she said, well, the first thing you have to do is get him to stop screaming. And I said, in my head, I thought, if you told me where the button was, don't you think I would have turned it off by now? And then I asked her for a home program, and she said, teach him 100 nouns, teach him 50 verbs. And I said, no, having worked with kids with disabilities and lots of good SLPs, I knew that was way off. So, we went through years and years of trying to find the right people, the right services that insurance would cover. And we spent a lot of money, but he turned 33 last week, and he's in a group home and he's very happy.
What challenges have you encountered regarding access to care for autism services as a parent?
When we started this journey in 1994, there was almost nothing in New Mexico around to help families with autism. The university had started the Autism Project. It wasn't even a permanent thing. It was a project, which eventually through the years has turned into the autism programs at UNM. So we tried a few different pediatric therapists. Some did well with him. Some had no clue what they were doing. Kids are not just little adults. You can't treat them the same. And kids with autism are really not little adults that, you can't tell them to do 10 sit-ups or whatever. So eventually we found a therapy group that really got it. And so we were lucky that my husband's work had great insurance. We still paid, lots and lots of money, but pretty much all we had access to was occupational and speech and language therapies. He started in a preschool program, and was very happy. We were worried about his transition. And the first day we put him on the bus, and my husband drove behind him, and we planned to go pick him up, and he got back on the bus that day, and he rode the bus the rest of the time. He loved school. He loved going to school. And like all parents know, it's kind of the luck of the draw, what kind of teacher you get. If they know, I remember I used to do a lot of training around autism using videos of Eric. And I remember one video, all of the adults went into the office area and left the kids. I mean, it was just a cross-categorical DD preschool. And Eric there were shelves along 3 walls. And while they were in there discussing who knows what, Eric wiped out all the shelves. I mean, he just went along and knocked everything out. And I thought, these people don't understand what it is. And so we saw a lot of stuff on video that it was like, wow, they don't have a clue. And it's not really their fault because we didn't get really trained on it. Autism, when Eric was diagnosed, they quoted the incidence at 1 in 1,667. So, it was, even when I was in PT school, it was like, oh, here's a person with autism. You'll probably never see another one in your career. And we know how that's worked out. So preschool was kind of a hit and miss. And then we got lucky in kindergarten, and they had started an autism classroom at the close by. It wasn't our home school, but it was the close by school with special ed programs. He got with a teacher there, and she used the teach method, which is an old school method out of North Carolina, but it worked really well for him. He essentially taught himself how to read, how to decode words. And the teacher kept saying, Liz, you're doing such a good job with Eric on reading. And I'm like, And she was a good friend. We served on the New Mexico Autism Society board together. And she said, Eric is reading. And I was like, I don't think so, until I saw it on videotape. And he's one of those kids that everything was compartmentalized. You used the toilet at home. You didn't use it anywhere else. You went in your diaper. You read at school. You never read at home. And so we had gotten him a little phonics bus, and he taught himself phonics. And he's a good decoder. His decoding last time we tested was about 6th grade. His comprehension was like 2nd or 3rd. As he got older, things got harder in terms of caring for him and finding services. Middle school was kind of a mixed bag. Again, we had a good teacher one year and not so great teachers the other years. And then high school, he was doing okay. But they put him in a classroom with a long-term sub because kids with disabilities are never prioritized, in my opinion. And so they put the certified teacher in the gifted class, and left this class with the long-term sub who had him coloring Easter bunnies in November and just really inappropriate stuff. And so we went down the road of a complaint, and we had a negotiated agreement with the high school. And on the very first day after everyone signed the papers, they went right back to what they had been doing. And so rather than fight again, we moved schools and got a good teacher in another high school where he graduated. But it had always been a fight to. I mean, he's tall. He's 6'7". He was always tall, and they used to call him the gentle giant because he loved being at school. You know, I mean, he had autism, but he was not. Anything a teacher would ask him to do, he would do, and he loved it. He learned a lot of things. And then when he reached high school, an occupational therapist decided that he was scary. His dad is black. My husband is black, so he's half black. And she said, we need to be afraid of him. We need to be very afraid of him. And so then they started treating him like they needed to be, like he was a bear in a cage, and they enjoyed poking him. In one of his high school classes, the teacher would sit at the front and read the newspaper, and the kids would do whatever, those people who think kids are going to pick up social skills by being around other kids. Well, he'd been around those other kids his whole life. It's not going to happen by osmosis. And I talked with the administrator, and the administrator said, oh, we call that socialization class. It's like, no. So, I mean, it a mixed bag. We kept him in high school till he was 22. Then he graduated, and we tried having him work at Goodwill, which was not a good fit. His behavior consultant had a meeting with them, and she said they treated her like, we don't take those kind of people. But one of the things she told them is he gets overwhelmed easily with language. So the first 15 minutes he was at his new job, the nurse was talking in one ear and another person was talking in another ear, and he just couldn't. And so he spit on them, and they kicked him out in less than 15 minutes. So we haven't been able to. He goes to a day hab, which he really enjoys, but I think he could have done so much more if we could have found the right fit. But it wasn't really available in New Mexico, and I'm not sure that it's still that it is at this point.
So is all of this what ultimately led you into politics in New Mexico? And like, how did that happen? And can you talk about some of your accomplishments in politics?
It did lead me that way. I mean, I joined the New Mexico Autism Society as soon as we got a diagnosis. And at my first meeting, someone who ended up being my best friend for years looked me straight in the eye and said, we need a treasurer. And I said, okay, I'll be the treasurer. So I became treasurer, and then I became president. And we started the first Autism Day at the Capitol in New Mexico. I was an unpaid advocate, like lots of parents are. And we kind of looked around and said, we really need someone in Santa Fe to bring this voice, because those folks up there don't understand it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. I had done a program called Partners in Policymaking, and one homework assignment was to invite a legislator to a meeting. So we invited our state senator, and Eric, I think, was 4 at the time. And he just had autism all over the place. He literally climbed up the man's head and down the other side. He crashed into walls. He drank out of his drink. He ate off his plate. And at the end, as he was leaving, I said, you've seen how hard this can be on families. And we have something called the DD waiver, which allows for folks to have services regardless of their parents' financial status, essentially. So I said, we really would appreciate if you could put more money into DD waiver, because families like ours are really struggling. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, well, my party is all about personal responsibility, so I don't think really we should do that. So I will not vote for more money. And he planted a seed in the back of my head that said, someday I'm going to run against you, and I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to go to Santa Fe. So as it turned out, that was a year for redistricting, and I got redistricted out of his district by 5 houses. And so I thought, okay, well, and then he retired, and I thought, okay, that's that. Well, as it turned out, the redistricting put me into a Republican district. And so folks came to me and said, will you run for this office? And I said, sure. And so I did. I beat an incumbent against everyone's best thoughts, including my own. I really didn't think I had a chance, but it was a very competitive race. and I won, and I got up there, and he came back the next in 2 years and beat me, and then I came back in 2 years, and he decided not to run, so I've been there ever since. So this I'm just finishing up my 10th year, and we've done a lot. The DD waiver is much, actually, the waiting list before we did this was up to 17 years to wait to get services. And so one of the things that the current governor has done is end the waiting list. So families are not waiting. But the trouble is we still don't have enough services to serve all the folks that came off the waiting list. But I've passed a few bills. When Eric first moved into a group home, it was a hard transition for him. I mean, he'd always lived with us, and so the emergency plan was to call 911, and the police and ambulance would come. And by the time they got there, he was calmed down, and they put him in the ambulance, took him to a hospital. He sat in the ER overnight, and in the morning, a psychiatrist called me and said, we really don't have any options for autism except putting him into the psych hospital, and we don't think that's a good idea. And I'd say, you're right, it's not a good idea. And they'd send him home. And that happened fairly frequently. But um, after we started getting bills from the hospital. And I would call them and say, he's got Medicaid. And they would say, we don't cover autism after age 19. And I thought, wow, I wish someone told me autism stopped at 19. We would have had a much easier few years. And so they kept telling me that. And so I got a bill passed that said that autism was covered regardless of the age. And I would love when they would bill me and I would call them back and they'd say, we don't cover autism over 19. I say, well, I happen to pass a bill that does make you cover it. And people were like, what? I mean, that was a great feeling, kind of like, you can't give me that baloney, because I passed the bill. One that passed last year that I had been working on since I started, it's called non-traditional communication. And what it does is when you register your car, you can check a box that someone, either the driver or someone in the car, has a disability. It could be autism, deafness. And I worked in the deaf school. I have deaf friends. And, I'd say, when you get stopped by the police, what do you do? Well, they reach in their pocket to get out their card that says I'm deaf. And all I could see was someone saying, hands up or I'll shoot. And you're reaching in your pocket. And, we've heard those stories. We haven't had anything like that in New Mexico turn tragic. Although what really sealed it for me is another autism mom. Her son was an adult, and his caretaker picked him up at work, and they were speeding home because the man with autism had to go to the bathroom, and they got stopped by the police. The man with autism jumped out of the car, and the police drew their weapons. And luckily, the caretaker was able to talk them down. So I just was worried for my Eric and for everyone else who might. So it took 12 years to get that passed, but in 2023 we passed it, and it will become law July 1st in New Mexico. And so I mean, it's like, who could be against that? But it took me in many tries. And I will tell you, on the floor of the House when I was debating it, someone asked me, literally, so do you think police should treat someone who's deaf differently? And I said, yeah, I would hope so. I mean, so that was the kind of ignorance that we faced, but hopefully we won't have any of those kind of situations in New Mexico thanks to that. So that, I think that's the one that was the most of my heart.
Through that process, what did you learn about I mean, I'm assuming over that long stretch of time, what did you learn about the political and legislative process through all that?
I kind of knew it, but this really cemented it, that most of my peers didn't have any kind of understanding of disability, autism. I mean, and now with autism so prevalent, everybody knows somebody. When I first started my advocacy work, we have suites of offices where legislators were, and I'd go in and we made ribbon cookies and we made ribbon pins, and we brought them information, and almost without fail, someone in the office said, my grandson has autism, or my neighbor's kids have autism or something. So what I really learned was that a whole lot of education was needed. There was a whole lot of stigma, and there was a whole lot of just wrong information. So I mean, we knew beforehand that education was needed, but it's still an eye opener when people say things like what I said about the treating deaf people differently. So um, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of power struggles. There's a lot of who knows who, etc. I do now chair the House Health and Human Services Committee, which I'm very proud of, and I'm vice chair of the Legislative Health and Human Services Committee. I've learned that things take time. I mean, I was so impatient. It's like, why can't, we need to do this now. And we did, but that's not going to help make it happen. So learning the processes, I'm very proud to say that our House is majority women. And I think that makes a big difference. People have come to know me kind of as the disability expert in the legislature. So, if there's disability issues that people want carried, they frequently bring them to me. Or if my colleagues have actually this morning, I was at a meeting with a family with one of my colleagues, who's looking at guardianship for their adult daughter. And so it's a learning experience. And New Mexico is truly the last citizen legislature. We don't get paid. We don't have staff except when we're in session. And I had one staff member because I was a committee chair. Usually House members share a staff member. So a group of women, I'm not really active in that, but we're looking at making our sessions longer because now they're 30 days and 60 days. And the rest of the time we have no staff, we have no offices, the phone numbers that people call are our cell phones. So we're trying to professionalize our legislature, because let's face it, how many people can take off 60 days one year and 30 days the next year and still keep paying their bills? The only reason I could do it is I was working in the schools and they had political leave, and then I retired, so I'm able to do it. But we're old, because retired people don't have to go to work, and we aren't really representative of New Mexico. So that's been a push for several years, and I'm going to keep on pushing on that, as are most of my colleagues, so that we can have a legislature that looks more like New Mexico.
How would you say that your mindset has evolved from when you got started in this, or maybe even from when your son was diagnosed until now?
I've grown much more patient in terms of Eric and in terms of political stuff. I mean, I would just go crazy if people voted against my bill, or, I would be angry and I would be frustrated. And I've gotten to the point where I say, you know what, I wish it could happen now, but my wishes aren't necessarily going to make things come true. So I've become much more patient. I think better at building coalitions, at bringing people along with me, and been doing a lot of education.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of holding an elected office?
The feeling like you really can make a difference. That, when I was a parent and an advocate, it was, sometimes you felt like you were beating your head against the wall. And I still feel like that sometimes. But I can also counsel people and say, no, we didn't get it this year. We're not going to give up. It's not the end of the world. Yes, it's going to slow us down by a year or 2 or 5 or 10, but we will get there. That you need to be patient. You need to build relationships, and you need to be passionate. If you're not passionate about it, you just let it slide when it doesn't happen the first few times, and be willing to compromise. I mean, any of my bills haven't been what I had originally envisioned them as, but they got passed, and we can always go back and update things and revamp things and add more. So again, I think patience is one of the things I've really learned. But it is nice to know that, and to have made connections. This past session, I had a family who I had known with the Autism Society, probably 30 years ago, and they came to me and said, we're getting older, and our son is getting harder and harder to take care of, and we need to start looking at, having him somewhere besides living with us. And so it was nice to be able to make a few phone calls and get them hooked up with a group home that specializes in behavioral issues, for so that they can have him in a group home and go on with their lives and still have him close by. So I think having, and I don't want to call it power, but I guess it is a little bit of power that, when I call folks, it's different. When Representative Thomson calls folks, it's a little different than when Liz calls folks. And I hate that that's the way it is, but that's the game we're in. So yeah, I'd leave it at that.
If a family is in need and they can get in touch with you, you obviously you can't solve everything, but what they're going to get from a talk with you is going to be information that when you were first getting involved in this might have taken you so much longer to obtain.
I would agree with that very much. So, I mean, and as I said, things are still not great in New Mexico for families dealing with autism. But when I was the chair of well, at the time it was the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, and I think we had either 3 or 5 BCBAs in New Mexico at that time, and there was talk of starting a BCBA association, and it's like, we kind of need some more people. It's so it's been good to see the services grow. It's the diagnosis process is still way too long. The University of New Mexico autism programs have basically put a moratorium on, as far as I know, on any diagnosis except infants and toddlers, essentially. So the wait to, I mean, and there are professionals out there who do autism diagnosis. Some are good, some are not so good. So that's still a big issue that I think we need to address, is how families can get a diagnosis and kind of put them on the right track of what meetings to go to, what websites to go to, what books to read. That's a big problem, but we're making progress.
Now, you recently met with Autism Behavior Services, my company that I work for, and you were discussing expanding care throughout the state. What would you ideally like to see happen with that?
I grew up in a rural area. I grew up on the Navajo reservation in New Mexico. So, people say, "Oh, you don't understand rural." Actually, my first 6 years, my dad taught in a one-room schoolhouse on the Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. So we didn't have a phone, 40 miles to the nearest store over a gravel road. So I do understand rural, and there's no way we're going to have providers in the tiniest of communities. So families are going to have to travel, or we're going to have to pay for professionals to travel. For years, I worked in the family infant toddler program doing PT with infants and toddlers with disabilities, and they don't pay mileage, and they don't pay if the family is a no-show or the kid is asleep. So I would go out to Grants, which is about 85 miles, and I could easily spend 10 hours out there and bill for one, plus pay for my driving time and my gas costs and stuff. So I'm hoping that we will have, at least within a reasonable drive for families, a variety of services that their kids need. And we really need to work on our education system. I had a bill last year to work on special ed. It didn't pass. The governor did some of the things that we were working on in an executive order, but we now have a special ed bureau in the public education department, which I hope will be helpful. So just having services within a reasonable wait or no wait at all, and services in schools, and then ABA services and OT and SLP and things like that families can access without breaking the bank and without having to travel 3 or 4 hours. Eric got therapy twice a week. I can't imagine driving in from Crown Point, which is about 130 miles, twice a week to get therapy in Albuquerque. So just having more professionals, more understanding, and a better school system.
How would you like to see families be able to access services? Like what would that look like if you could money was no object, how would that look to Liz Thomson?
Well, that would look like diagnostic centers, not in every little town, as I said. I know even if money was no object, it's hard to get professionals to live in some of those places. So just one thing that I did get passed is a special ed ombud program through the Developmental Disabilities Council. And I believe now there's 3, most of it is done volunteer. I would love to see that program fully staffed so that when families run into a brick wall in the schools, which they frequently do, they could have someone to reach out to and what the program has done already has been fabulous, but there's just not enough of it. So I would love to see a really strong ombud program and school districts taking seriously their obligation to educate all kids. Some districts do, some districts don't, and some districts just kind of do the very minimum and then wait for a lawsuit, and then they get sued, and then they get services for one kid, but it doesn't change the whole system. So I would like there to be ombuds available throughout the state. And another of my dreams has been having like an autism office within the state where, among other things, there could be regional coordinators on autism. You'd have, I don't know, have 10 in the state or something, so those people could help the school districts find the people and go to conferences and learn things, and just building a whole better system from diagnosis to schools to post-secondary, whatever it be, jobs, living, all the therapies, everything, have it accessible to folks in terms of location, in terms of paying for it, essentially.
Now, if you could go back, give yourself one piece of advice when you were starting out, what would that piece of advice be? Something that you constantly come back to and think, yeah, if I could have told myself that then, that would have helped me along now.
Probably patience. And I know that kind of sounds weird because I always was and still am wanting for things to happen. Patience with Eric, it was really hard. I mean, if he slept for 15 minutes, he was good for 12 hours, and I was working like 8 to 3:30, and my husband was working 3:30 to midnight. And so when I'd pick him up from my mother-in-law's house where he would get daycare essentially, and fell asleep in the car on the way home, he was good for 12 hours. And at that point, I was actually working out in Grants, which is about an hour and 15-minute drive. And I used to pray when I was driving out there to go to work that my car would break down so I could just pull off beside the road and sleep. I didn't want to worry about work, didn't want to worry about Eric. I knew he was safe, and just get some quality sleep beside the road. And I eventually got help for my own depression. I was suicidal, and I had planned to take him with me because, sleep deprivation and all of those kind of things, people judging, you're a terrible parent and all that kind of stuff. So I think maybe a little more gentleness with myself and with others around me, knowing that it was a long haul, and that we weren't going to wave any magic wands and everything go away. Just understanding that and giving myself and other folks the benefit of the doubt, essentially. We're doing the best we can, and but getting professional help, and thank God, better living through chemistry, antidepressants helped me through that, and look at me now.